Week 7. Let's start in San Francisco. Kansas City gets the win 28-18. And you know that I love Mahomes. I appreciate it so much. I have so much fun watching him. This is not an original thought. It doesn't mean, hey, you know whose podcast is really good is that guy that likes Mahomes. But if I didn't love Mahomes, I can't imagine what Sundays would be like. It'd be the worst. I mean, especially if you're another fan of a team in the AFC West, like watch your team. But Chargers defense is awesome this year. But I want to dig into what's happening with the Chiefs to end this 6-0 record, because you're watching them play every week and being like, they won again? Like, what? Mahomes hasn't even been great this season, and they still just beat everybody? And we'll get to the San Francisco part about this a little bit here in the end. So Mahomes is 16-27 on the day for 154 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks. First pick, definitely not his fault, tip ball. Second pick, receiver falls down. You can make an argument that maybe the throw, but he's expecting the wide receiver to beat a defensive back on the ball anyway. So, we don't have to run into all of his interceptions, which, there's certain times with guys that are really good where I'm like, well, even if he had the pick, like those are different. All interceptions are not created equally, right? He does run one in, trucking Mustafa at the goal line, who, if you've watched Mustafa play, is just a guy who wants collisions. Like, I don't know if anybody's in Rodney Harrison's class where the play would be over and he would just smash into the back of somebody, sometimes his own teammate, when the pile, like the whistle had been blown and Harrison's like, I'll just hit somebody. Mustafa's that kind of guy. Mustafa had a collision with Xavier Worthy where it looked like a car crash. And aside, with the receiver injuries that the Chiefs are dealing with, I don't know that I'd want Worthy on these end arounds. They look great. He's maybe faster than everybody else out on the field. But because he's slight and he gets going so fast, one block that's missed and they collide, like I don't even know if it's worth the 2 looks and maybe the 15. I know he broke the really big one in the first game, but I'd be worried about keeping him healthy because of his build on some of these. So you have Mahomes truck that dude at the goal line and run one in. But these aren't even vintage Mahomes performances, and they're still undefeated. Yes, a lot of it is the defense. They're really good. Some of the stuff isn't necessarily off the charts. And it's not like he's running it more. We can sit here and pretend that he's just not. It was his first rushing touchdown in 2 years in the regular season. The other thing that I've been looking at with Mahomes, too, and we know that, post Tyreek Hill, there was like, okay, well, they're not going to have the deep shot and take everything off, and he's going to have to throw underneath. Okay, no problem. I'll just do that. All right, everybody's hurt. No problem. I'll just do that. The earlier years of having to probably be more aggressive and take more shots because the defense wasn't as good. No problem. That's fine. And now he has this defense that he can rely on it a little bit more. But there was something that I was looking at when I was looking at his stats last night and then again this morning. If you look at his average depth of target over his career, his first season, it was 9.1 yards. Now it's 5.3. It's gone down in 7 straight seasons. So, again, the simple explanation is he's changed his approach. But the scary thing is that that's part of changing the approach based on personnel and who's healthy and everything. But like those numbers, when we first saw it, it's like this guy's just going to chuck it all over the place. Like he could probably just go back to that if he had the kind of personnel that you would hope to have with him. There was another couple, like different numbers where he's the all-time leader in yards per game, net yards per attempt. Yesterday, before the San Francisco game, he was the all-time leader in yards per attempt. He's actually not now, I think, as I woke up and that number was different once I looked at Football Reference. So what does this all mean? Look, we can talk about, again, him changing his approach based on the personnel and the defense and all of that kind of stuff. It's really good as far as scoring defense, but I mentioned some of the other stuff it's not like it's the most dominant defense in the league. I guess I just can't believe that this is the Mahomes that we've seen through 6 games, and he's still so good the moment you need him to be perfect on something, keep a play alive, figure it out. I do worry about some of the traffic around him in the pocket. Like, is this sustainable? Can he actually stay this healthy all the time? Like, it'll look like he takes some really nasty shots where he's keeping the play alive, like hoping to get this trailing tight end going across the field in front of him. And he's like, everyone's around his legs and he's like bent over, just kind of like about to fall down. He's throwing. There's just a lot of stuff that's around him all the time, all this chaos around his legs that it actually concerns me a little bit. But when you need that play, the dude always seems to make it. And then the big run down the left sideline which again, for the defensive players in the league, this thing with the quarterbacks running down the sideline sucks because the late flag, like most of this stuff that's changed in the last few years, a lot of hand wringing was a massive waste of time. Oh, I like the NFL because guys are killing it. Now, you still watch it, right? Sure, there's a few hits every now and then from the past that were a lot of fun and really entertaining, but all of us have collectively gotten over it. We have not changed the channel because the lack of collisions, okay? Some of it's overprotective. A lot of stuff that happens with the quarterback seems egregious in their favor, but it's all because of like the greater good of the health of some of these players. But the sideline stuff has been very reactionary in the way it's been called because a guy can be in bounds and about to step out of bounds. And if you plaster him, you're going to get a flag for a late hit because everybody's kind of conditioned now to like, oh, it looks like he's giving himself up, so you don't have to take that shot. And what I've always told you all the time is when Sean Taylor killed the punter in the Pro Bowl, and I remember thinking like that was excessive. And Darren Woodson and I were talking about it on the air, and Darren Woodson just changed my mind that day. He was like, he's live. Like, what are you doing out there? If you've got the ball and you're live, it's on. Now, granted, that's a defensive back in his mindset, but he's right. If you're on the field, it's on. And quarterbacks are now allowed to just kind of slowly dance to the sideline. And it's expected that you're not going to hit them, even if they actually haven't stepped out of bounds at that point, because everybody's afraid of getting this flag. And that's what happened down the left sideline. I saw a play earlier this year with Kyler Murray where Kyler's going to go out of bounds and everybody stops because they don't want to get a flag. And before he goes out of bounds, he decides to like take another step and then dives forward at the sideline towards the legs of a defensive back. Like that would have been, if the defensive back was a quarterback, it would have been like roughing the passer. It was nasty, not just because he got the extra yards and everybody had given up. It was nasty because of the collision that he put into the legs of the defensive player, because the defensive player's pulling up and now he's thinking, okay, I'm relaxed. That's when the injuries happen. I don't know how it's fixed. I would like to see a few less flags for these borderline late hits because that lack of hit yesterday, and it looked like he may have gotten around Fred Warner. I got to check the all 22s. I'm not sure if I want to admit that right now. So he has the big run, longest run apparently of his career. So that's where we're at. San Francisco also lost this game because Purdy was terrible and they were down their top three wide receivers at one point. Ayuk with the ACL, Debo, 3 plays, the illness. Jennings, who I really like and has been good for them, is out. Purdy, the picks were brutal. I don't know if the second one was a bad route or an overthrow. That's the only one where I'd be willing to hear some kind of an excuse. But that's the other reason Kansas City wins this game. I'm not really ready to do a reclassification of the Niners, but I just can't fathom not loving Mahomes and how frustrated you would be with him winning another game against a good opponent. Okay, the best win, Detroit at Minnesota. Both teams 4-1 or better. The first time they had matched up where both teams were 4-1 and better since 1970. That's over 100 games. I picked Detroit in this game this week. Brutal NFL stretch for your boy. And it's just because I think they're going to win the division and I think they're the better football team. But I'm not sure that the outcome of this game, I'm not sitting here going, oh, definitively right, nailed it again, because both these teams are clearly really good. Down 10-0, the fake punt, Minnesota's ready for it. Detroit fights right back, 21 straight points, up 21-10, up 28-17, 2 different 11-point leads here. And I think one of the best signs for Minnesota, despite how you feel today, is that Darnold, it was only the first pass attempt that he had in this game, I believe, was the second pass attempt he had all season when actually trailing, and he was really good. They opened things up. It wasn't a game where Minnesota was just going to rely totally on its defense, even though the defense got a lot of pressure on Goff. This game really could have gone either way. So I think that that's a positive that you have the Darnold factor of like, what's he going to look like in a spot where you really need it from him? No issues with him. Really no issues with anything. I mean, we can go over a bunch of different things in all of this. I think Detroit's a little bit better. I may be wrong. Let's talk Goff, because at the start of the season, and because Goff is like in this new category of like, we're going to be a little more critical of you because our expectations are that much higher. And I was certainly really late to it, but he's just been so good now for a couple, I would say like a year, I don't know if it's a year and a half or whatever, but the start of the season was slow. Games below the standard that we would have for him, which is actually a compliment, but he's been on fire the last 3 weeks. And in games against Minnesota with Brian Flores as the defensive coordinator, he's completing 77% of his passes, 5 touchdowns, 0 picks. He's 3-0. And, he had the fumbles yesterday, not on the fumble that was the Montgomery fumble that led to the go-ahead touchdown by Minnesota, but he had 2 fumbles where I can't even believe he recovered both of them. So that was actually, even though he fumbled, pretty impressive. So Minnesota has, what do they got? The Rams with all their injuries, the Colts, Jacksonville, Tennessee, the next 4 games. So it'll be kind of nice after going up against Detroit. I think that's the best win. The other one you could throw in the category is Green Bay's game-winning field goal, now 5-2 with a 24-22 win over Houston. They held C.J. Stroud at 10 of 21. It's the second worst game, I think, of his career. There's another couple games you could say statistically are even in the conversation, so maybe it's the third. I think it's the second worst. Again, Stroud is good enough that now I don't think this is a real problem. It was a really weird game, though. Houston had their first 13 points were on 3 drives of 6, 11, and then 23 yards. So 40 yards of offense, 13 points. Kind of hard to do in the league. But it was the turnovers. You had an interception to start the game from Love. He had another interception before the end of the first half, which led to another Houston touchdown. So that put him at 19 points. But he stopped turning the football over. Green Bay is 5-2. They're a 6 seed, but still third place in that division because of the teams that we just got done talking about. The Stephon Diggs thing. I'm kind of sick of anybody having a ton of sympathy for him. Maybe there isn't any. I was surprised, though, this game was so spicy, considering Stop Hate is still in the end zones. Worst loss. It was last night. Sunday nighter. Everybody hates the Jets. Just an aside, The Rock is Santa Claus's personal trainer. In. All right, so the Jets are 2-5 since the 2-1 start, where Rodgers had that game against the Pats. We're like, man, that kind of looked like Aaron Rodgers again. I fell for it. I thought he looked really good. The 2nd and 17 throw where he's actually throwing to the sticks. Not a lot of guys doing that. He did it. I don't know that we all collectively realized how truly awful the New England Patriots are. We knew the roster was lacking talent, but at least last year defensively they were really good. Now they're just awful across the board. I don't know how many of you got up for that early one out here on the West Coast, but I watched a little Drake May. I wanted to see what it looked like. He looked all right. All right, so back to the Sunday nighter. So nobody likes the Jets, whether it's ownership, firing the coach. I don't think Rodgers' approval rating is the highest it's ever been. It's 37-15 to a Pittsburgh team that's not exactly known for its offense. Rodgers may have also picked his nose and ate it, but I don't think that he did. And we may need to reclassify Breece Hall. You know how I like to look at players who collide with camera people on the sidelines. He took a guy out. He couldn't even just turn around and give him a check-in thumbs up. That's what I love about Lamar Jackson. If he smashes into somebody on the sideline, he checks on him. I know that doesn't mean a lot to you. It does to me. It's something I continue to monitor. All right, but the real storyline about this wasn't about Rodgers or whatever, because it's just a Jets shitfest today. It was about the return of Russell Wilson, okay? And he needs this. He needs to come out into the tunnel. It's all a part of the Russell Wilson experience. He needs to be doing the pregame interview. No one missed it more than him not being able to do it after the calf injury and seeing Justin Fields get off to this team start, right? Because Pittsburgh was 4-2. So a lot of it was, why would they do this? And based on the Russell Wilson we saw in Denver, I think it's a really fair question. What do you actually think you're getting out of Russell Wilson? But you don't know what the conversations were like when they brought him in. I think a lesser franchise, they probably promised him something like Pittsburgh. I want to give the benefit of the doubt of hey, you're going to come in here and compete. We're not going to promise you anything. But there may have been something, or maybe Russell Wilson just looked at the opportunity, and then the Fields trade happens after it. So I guess I was trying to wonder what they saw. But again, they have him in their facility. They saw what he looked like before the calf injury. So maybe they saw something that they actually really like, because I can't imagine they liked much that was on the film from Denver. Far removed from the get up segment of, should we apologize to Russell Wilson? No, we should thank Denver's defense is actually what we should do. So I think it's worth digging into what the Steelers and Mike Tomlin were moving on from when they made the change from Fields to Wilson. So going into last night, Pittsburgh's offense was 25th in yards per game. They were 27th in yards per play. They were 22nd in points. They were 18th on third down conversions, and they were 20th in red zone touchdown percentage. Fields, who I've liked more in moments probably this season than at any other point in his career in Chicago. However, he really wasn't that good. He wasn't. He was 20th in QBR. He had 5 passing touchdowns. Yes, I know he's run in a bunch more, but I always feel like that's when I see guys that like are running in a little bit, like it's a nice thing to have, but it also tells me like when stuff gets weird around you, that's kind of your default. And it's a little late in his career to still be going there, whatever, fine, maybe. But the defense was the number 2 scoring defense, and they're +7 in turnover margin. That's why they were 4-2. It wasn't really because of Fields. So if we're being honest about the change, like as much as I don't love Russell Wilson, and that's been established, I could understand like maybe we just take a look at this and see where we're at, and maybe it's a little bit better. And guess what? Confession, it was so bad those first 2 series that I was chuckling. I wasn't obnoxiously laughing, but I was chuckling. A couple times where he went to run away from the pocket and he didn't. I was like, he looks pretty slow right now. That throw to the left side behind the wide receiver into the dirt. I was like, what is that? You know what I didn't do? Like everybody else, I didn't send a fucking tweet. Because it's like some of you have never watched games before. Because even if you can't stand Russell Wilson, like this is his first game action. We're towards the end of October. This guy's barely played any real football. Like, let him get warmed up. I thought the moon ball shot down the left sideline was totally underthrown. But what we learned with the Pickens relationship last night with Russell Wilson is he's just going to throw it to him over and over and over again and let Pickens win. And it kind of worked. And Russell settled down and he got better. The total numbers look pretty good, despite the fact those first few series looked awful. So I think it's worth being honest about what Pittsburgh was moving on from without any, like I didn't look at last night and go, they've got their guy. But as much as I was rooting for Fields in this, because trust me, I wanted to see Earpiece there all season long, just being like, I just want to do one sideline interview as the starter. They weren't moving on from John Elway. All right. Remember Tyreek Hill? I do. Colts, Miami. Do you know where your Colts are today in the playoff seeding? Well, they're 4-3 and they're a 7 seed. I don't have a lot on Miami and Indianapolis except for haircut awareness. I'm worried that 8 games into your career for a makeover is early for Anthony Richardson. Yesterday was his 9th game. But I think the full makeover, another injury, it's a move that I feel like he went to a little too soon.